Those of you paying attention may notice there's a slight difference in my voice during this one. This is because I appear to have contracted the phage. Normal service should resume on the next video when I've been able to replace my larynx with one stolen from a red shirt. Kira's annoyed, not in general like normal, but with specifics in this case. Progress on Bajoran isn't happening as fast as she'd like, thanks to delays and excuses from ministers who you'd think would be more inclined to get on with stuff after the attempted coup a few months back. Her annoyance with this would be her own business, except it's interfering with her job here on Deep Space Nine. That makes it Sisko's business too, and he gently reminds her of her responsibilities. Those duties immediately go out of the airlock again when she's called to Quark's. An agreement to let a well-known Bajoran musician play here isn't turning out quite like Quark planned. Rather than the expected boost in custom, everybody stopped drinking, playing, and holosuite wanking to listen to the music instead. Kira would rather he be playing somewhere else too, not for Quark's profits, but because he's a revered artist. Rebuilding concert halls on Bajoran isn't top of the post-occupation list though, and she has to apologise for the lack of action. Back to Ops we go, so Kira can be there when today's plot arrives. Something's coming through the wormhole, and it looks like it's in bad shape. That's not great news for the 4 people aboard, so we teleport them over. Sisko introduces himself and says we'll try to fix their ship and send them on their way, but that's all wasted on our guests. Something about their language means our translators aren't working right now, so we'll have to wait until it's got enough of a sample to start understanding them. They've taken a shine to Kira, so she's put in charge of herding them down to the infirmary for a checkup. There's some wandering on the way and distractions from items they find on the promenade. The 2 who are interested in grabbing things don't seem inclined to listen to Odo, and Kira's attempts aren't working either. The woman of their group is more effective in curtailing their sticky fingers, and off we go to the infirmary. They're a bit wary of Bashir and seem to want Kira to take care of things instead. Some reassuring noises from her eventually win them over, and they all get treated. They'll need a place to sleep, of course, if only to keep them away from the promenade and all those lovely grabbable products. We're still having language issues, but they understand the concept of food well enough, and the woman of the group is vocal in response. So much so that we're starting to pick up the odd translated word now. Some more talk gives us a steadily increasing success rate, and we slowly learn that her people, the Skrreea, need help. They're on the other side of the wormhole, and she wants to bring them here. All 3 million of them. The woman, whose name is Hanique, is being given a tour of Ops. It's an odd situation for her, not because of the technology, but because there are men here. See, Hanique is from a matriarchal society, Skrreean men being far too emotional and unruly to be trusted with anything of importance. Being in the presence of men with positions of leadership is an unusual experience for her. Not that she's a leader herself, she's just a farmer who had the good fortune of finding the fabled Eye of the Universe. Her people heard about the discovery of a tunnel and knew it must be the Eye of Legend, the one that would lead her people to their destined home. The legend also says this planet is just beyond the Eye, which might end up causing a bit of friction with the locals, depending on how strictly our visitors want to interpret this, especially when it's also said to be a planet of sorrow. Sisko tells her we'll do our best to find them a home and has sent mega-shuttles to try and contact her people. They're scattered about and looking for the wormhole she found, so it might take a while, but that's probably for the best, as DS9 has a maximum capacity of 7,000, according to Odo. If many arrive in one go, they'll have to stay on their ships. This would all be easier if we could coordinate with their leaders, but Hanique says they were mostly killed by a species who enslaved them centuries back. They were only able to get away when their conquerors were themselves conquered by people with more guns, members of a certain group called the Dominion. Kira's visiting Hanique with some news. She was asleep at the time, and her 2 men are sent back to her bed so she can talk to Kira without their distractions. Once we get past Kira's questions on polyamory, she delivers the news she came with. We contacted some of her people and they're on the way. As Hanique found the wormhole and has had a little time to adapt to life here, we want her to greet the newcomers. She's also being given a dress that Kira watched her make noise over before we could understand what they were saying. Probably should have checked with her first, as her untranslated comments were calling it hideous, though at least Kira agrees, so they have a laugh about it instead. What's less funny is Eggnog's attitude towards one of Hanique's group. He either doesn't understand replicators or thinks they aren't for him, as he's eating scraps from tables, and Eggnog is less than generous in his comments. At least Jake makes an effort. Eggnog's attitude might explain why he's subsequently being chased by a number of Skrreeans. They're stopped by Odo, and he discovers Eggnog's idea of a funny prank is to spray them with some foul-smelling goop. Odo removes him, though the kid, who's presumably Hanique's son, doesn't consider the matter closed. Quark clears things up with Odo by making all the right noises about remorse, and once that's taken care of, has his own bash at our newcomers. As well as depositing skin flakes everywhere, they're committing the cardinal sin of the Ferengi. They aren't buying anything. Maybe matters will solve themselves. Other Skrreeans are talking to Hanique and have decided that she, as the discoverer of the fabled eye, should also be the one to lead them to their destined homeworld, too. That's clearly a bit more than a humble farmer is used to, though Kira tries to reassure her that things will turn out well. So, too, does the Bajoran musician from earlier, who draws a parallel between their two peoples and offers her a gift of him playing in better times. Perhaps that comparison is what prompts Hanique to look at this solar system in particular when she returns to her quarters. Finding people so like them just on the other side of their legendary Eye of the Universe is all so very prophetic. Time may be running out to find a solution. Hanique's maybe son has caught up to Eggnog and he's brought mates. Jake tries to mediate, something which isn't exactly helped by Eggnog, and things get a bit handsy as a result. Quark splits it up and uses the opportunity to stick in a few insults and let them know that they aren't welcome here. Just as well, then, that Dax and Sisko have found a suitable planet. It carries the unfortunate name of Draylon 2, but beyond the reference to plastic fabric, is otherwise ideal for their needs. Telling Hanique doesn't exactly go to plan, and not just because her mates are a bit thrown by the presence of Sisko. See, they've already found the homeworld they were destined to settle on, and it'll surprise nobody who's been paying attention that they've decided it's Bajor. Such a serious request warrants a serious response, which is why we've arranged for a minister and a Vedek to pop over and deliver a formal decision. They've formally listened, they've formally debated, and they've formally chosen to tell the Skrreeans to go do one. Bajor's only been free of occupation for a year and they're still getting their own shit in order. Having 3 million people settle down while that's ongoing isn't an option. I mean, okay, we have massive areas of land that are uninhabited, and okay, your people are largely agrarian, which would mean a net gain to global food production, and okay, you've got a whole arseload of ships that would basically give Bajor both a defensive fleet of its own and a sizable merchant navy to boot, but that's a whole lot of work, so we're not gonna do it. To be fair to the Bajorans, they say they're worried what'll happen if the Skrreean crops fail. Hanique explaining that they won't expect help under such circumstances fails to convince them. Standing idly by while millions starve isn't an appealing prospect, especially when there's a perfectly serviceable alternative on planet Upholstery. Hanique tries to have Kira back her up and say this will work out. The problem is that Kira agrees with the decision, or at least says she does. Bajor isn't their home, but that doesn't mean they haven't got one. As you might expect, this is not a popular decision among Skrreeans. Jake sees Hanique's maybe son queuing for food, so someone's finally explained how the replicators work. Feels like a thing that you'd put in the welcome brochure, but whatever. Hanique's maybe son is okay with Jake as long as Eggnog's not around, though Jake speaks up in his defense, so that's nice of him. Jake mentioning planet Upholstery draws a negative response. Hanique's maybe son doesn't fancy it, and when Jake says it sounds okay, snookers him by asking if he'd want to live there. Fair point, son. Well, maybe, son. That might explain what happens next. Kira and Hanique are having a ding-dong about what happened in the meeting, Hanique feeling betrayed by how it turned out. The argument is interrupted by Sisko. Hanique's maybe son has nicked a ship with 2 mates and buggered off, their plan being to land on Bajor. Quite what happens after that isn't explained. He's not even nicked a good ship, as this one's squirting out radiation. To be devil's advocate for a second, maybe that makes him very smart indeed, as he grabbed the ship nobody expected to get stolen. You know, because it will kill you. Sisko wants Hanique to try talking to him and finally confirms, 40 minutes into the episode, that she's his mum, but it's pointless. He's not responding and Bajor has scrambled a couple of ships to intercept. A lot of shouting happens between Kira and the interceptor pilots, then Sisko and the general who scrambled the pilots. Maybe all this distraction for the pilots is why they're surprised when they start getting shot at. The stolen ship might be dinged up, but at least its guns are working. Unfortunately, the guns on the interceptor ships are working too. The General's order to disengage comes too late, and Haneek's son becomes Haneek's ex-son. Kira's saying goodbye to Haneek and, without being asked, repeats that she thinks this is the best option for both their peoples. Haneek believes this decision is the result of fear beaten into them by decades of Cardigan occupation, an argument that might carry more weight if her dead son hadn't just shot at some of them. Still, she might have a point, and we'll leave Kira to ponder if Bajor just passed up a willing partner in helping it get back on its feet until the next adventure. What is Bajor to do if your people start dying? Do you really think we could stand by and do nothing? We would feel obligated to help with food, with clothing, with whatever it would take. And where would that aid come from? Our resources are already depleted. To help you would mean depriving our own people. As excuses go, it's a pretty good one, but is that exactly what it is? An excuse? Bajor has access to replicator technology. Even if the Federation aren't sharing it with them, Deep Space Nine is under Bajoran control, and there are replicators all over the place. Many Bajorans have been working here in a technical capacity for a year now, and probably learned plenty more prior to that, despite the efforts of the Cardigans to prevent it. And we know from the episode Progress last season that there's a whole moon that's been turned over to energy production. That was earmarked for heating homes, but it's going spare during warmer months if that's the case. And even if none of those things were true, the Skrreeans are flying here in ships that presumably have both energy and food supplies. There's certainly no indication that those arriving were on the last desperate gasp of their journey, struggling along on fumes and crumbs. The first ship we encountered was damaged, sure, and there's mention of repairs to others, but the people aboard certainly weren't emaciated, nor were any of those who followed. And there was no problem with the Skrreeans just packing up their stuff and moving on when the Bajorans told them they weren't welcome, so they've at least got enough to make it to another world. So would resources really have been such a significant issue for them, even without the option of calling for Federation aid? It seems a little flimsy. 3 million mouths is a lot of food, but it's a problem the Skrreeans were already currently solving. Let's look at another possible reason for the rejection then. It didn't take long for Skrreeans to gain a negative reputation among some inhabitants of the station. Indeed, Haneek herself referred to Skrreean men as emotional and aggressive. Thing is, Ferengi refer to their women with equal derision, albeit for different reasons, and we know that to be cultural rather than factual. The only violence we saw here was after Haneek's son had been targeted, and he was willing to talk to Jake once it was over, despite his intervention in the fight. Hardly the actions of someone who favours confrontation. The theft of a ship and fleeing came after Quark made it clear that they weren't wanted. Should we now say that Eggnog and Quark's provocation constitute emotional and aggressive behaviour, meaning Ferengi shouldn't be welcome here either? And what if it was true? What if the tendency for violence in Skrreean men is accurate? How much of that is innate and how much the result of being enslaved for centuries? It's a question we've asked here before when talking about the Kazon in Voyager, and just as valid now. Or better yet, let's look closer to home. The cultured and peaceful Bajorans became a resistance movement that performed acts of terrorism, some of them resulting in the deaths of children, in just 50 years. The Skrreeans were occupied for 800. How much of this is learned rather than instinct? It all loops back to what we've said before here over and over again. The Federation can afford to have morals because all of its other needs are met. Remove those and you soon start to see a lot more shades of grey in your ethical judgments, whether that's learning aggression is the safest default reaction, or denying asylum to those in need because of fear for yourself. Our logic exists for about as long as we feel secure, after which point we act on emotion. Perhaps a thing to think about the next time you're told to be scared by someone in a position of power. Let's end on a different topic. Kira's surprise at seeing Haneek had multiple partners got me thinking about how the majority of alien species we meet are monogamous, despite that being relatively rare in mammalian life here on Earth. In fact, the overwhelming majority of mammals here on our own little planet will, to use the scientific term, put it about a bit. We're back to the prevailing attitudes of those in charge, of course, with a hint of what the people who wanted to be more progressive could sneak into scripts, I suspect. In a series that struggled to display anything that isn't heterosexual monogamy, it's pleasing to see something beyond that narrow band get included, even if it was largely to highlight how different they were. We could probably have a conversation about how portraying the multiple partners as being inferior is problematic, but baby steps are better than no steps at all. End of episode.
I think the smartest thing to do would be to ask Oda what he knows about these other dogs. If they were locked up, he'll have data.
He's not just going to hand it out, though, is he? That's against the rules or something.
What's wrong with your voice?
Nothing.
No, your voice is. You know what? I don't care. Anyway, we'll say we're related or something.
That's not gonna work. We don't look anything like 'em. See? Completely different.
How did you... Whatever. Okay then, we'll just break in and steal the data ourselves.
Break in.
Yes.
To the security office.
Yes.
Of someone who can hide in plain sight.
Yes.
Yeah, alright then. Sounds like a laugh. Woof.